The shields on 19 ships failed before their crews heard an alarm. No klaxon, no warning shot. Just plating that had held for 11,000 years, gone soft as wet paper in the space between one heartbeat and the next. On the bridge of the Certainty's weight, War Marshal Drethkal's secondary eyelids clicked once, then went still. That never happened. His eyelids always clicked when the math didn't resolve. They had simply stopped clicking, as if his body had already understood something his mind refused. A voice came over the command channel, flat, unhurried. "Human, your math is wrong." 3 words. That was all Admiral Senekestrel sent back. She did not gloat. She set her stylus down on the console, the way she set everything down, deliberately, and watched the tactical display fill with red. The vote that had started all this had been 401 to 9. The 9 who voted no had done the actual math. Nobody in the Chancel of Measures had believed them because the 9 included a species 3 centuries into council membership and still, by every formal measure, weightless. Humanity had been told calmly that the border it was defending no longer belonged to it. 11 minutes later, 94 railgun mounts had already answered from 600,000 kilometers away, a range the Ascendancy's own doctrine called impossible, and Drethkal was standing in his own corridor across the barrel of a rifle he had not seen arrive. "I wish I could tell you it ended there. It didn't. Stay close." 19 years earlier, nobody in the Chancel had known the ending was already being built. The ruling took 3 words. Pale stone rings rose in tiers beneath a dome of black glass, filtering a dying star into light the color of old wine, and at the center of it, War Marshal Drethkal stood at the speaking platform with his hands folded behind his back. The Chancel of Measures had spent 11,000 years learning how to make 3 words sound inevitable. 12 campaign scars ringing his left forearm like a ledger. Nobody needed to check twice. "The Halver boundary," he said, "has been contested for 3 cycles. Contested measures resolved to the party with demonstrated strength." He did not raise his voice. He never had to. "Humanity's claim is provisional. It ends today." The vote came fast, the way votes always came when the outcome had been decided before the question was asked. 401 to 9. Elder Venora, small and pale, elongated fingers folded in her lap, did not argue further. She was the oldest delegate in the chamber and had learned, across a very long life, that the Chancel only heard numbers it already believed. She logged her objection as the record required and said nothing else. Later, this silence would matter more than anything she might have shouted. Drethkal did not look at her. He had already turned toward the door, already composing the message that would go to the human border station at Thessenhold, already certain of the shape the answer would take. Certainty, for him, was not a feeling. It was arithmetic. 12 campaigns won, 5 worlds annexed. A war marshal did not lose an argument he had already finished winning on paper. Thessenhold received the ultimatum mid-shift, on a console that had been idle for 6 hours. Admiral Senekestrel read it once, standing, and did not sit down afterward. 19 years of service had worn her into a particular shape, unshakable, economical, a woman who decided once and never revisited the decision. A hairline scar crossed her left knuckles, souvenir of a training accident when she was 26, and her hands moved now with the same care they always did, setting the data slate down flat instead of dropping it. "They gave us a deadline," said Lieutenant Ayer from the fire control station. His hand hovered over a panel that had never, in the history of the station, gone fully live. 6 hours. "Then we have 6 hours, Kestrel said. She did not raise her voice either. It was, in its way, the same certainty Drethkal carried, except hers had never been announced. For 19 years, budget lines nobody outside 3 departments could read had funded something called the phone array, drawing shipyard power in silence, under line items that matched nothing an outside auditor could connect. Nobody at Thessenhold called it a secret. They called it maintenance. Sergeant Vossler stood at the ready bay hatch, checking his kit by feel more than sight, the way he always did before anything. His thumb found the fused disc he kept on a cord beneath his collar and rubbed across it once, out of habit rather than nerves. It didn't have edges anymore. His grandfather's dog tags had melted onto a scrap of hull metal 9 years ago. On the last border world, humanity had lost to an arithmetic argument nobody had thought to fight. It wasn't 2 things now. Just wait. "Comms are open to the Ascendancy fleet," Ayer said. "They're not expecting a reply before the deadline." "They're not getting one before the deadline," Kestrel said. "Osoro, status on the fold." From the far console, without looking up, Osoro answered like it was nothing. 1,200 insertions logged, 0 failures. Nobody outside this program has ever known it existed. He said it the way a man reports the weather. Kestrel nodded once. She did not smile. She had learned, a long time ago, that certainty didn't need to be loud to be real. It only needed to be true when the moment came to test it. She looked at the countdown on the main display, 6 hours bleeding down towards 0, and at the fleet gathering on the other side of the Halvor boundary, 86 ships moving with the unhurried confidence of an empire that had never once been wrong. "Send them nothing," she said. "Let them cross first." Vossler's hand closed around the disc one more time before he let it drop back beneath his collar. Somewhere behind him, in a bay that had never gone live, something began, very quietly, to hum. The hum in the ready bay didn't stop. It changed pitch once and settled into something too low to hear and too steady to ignore, the sound of a system built to run silent for the rest of its life, if silence was ever what the moment called for. Vossler didn't ask what it meant. Nobody asked him to explain the disc under his collar either. Some things in a unit you just carried. Across the Halvor boundary, the Kalvathi fleet advanced in a formation Drethkal had used 11 times before and lost never once. Ships moved in staggered wedges, each one covering the blind angle of the one ahead, a pattern refined over campaigns until it had stopped being strategy and become instinct. He stood on the bridge of the Certainty's Weight with his hands folded behind his back and watched his fleet close the distance the way a man watches a door he already knows will open. "Elder Venora requests a channel," said the communications officer. Drethkal's secondary eyelids clicked once. She voted no. The matter is closed. She says her sensors are reporting an anomaly. He turned. Finally, mild interest breaking his stillness. "What anomaly?" The officer hesitated in the particular way subordinates hesitate before delivering a report they don't understand themselves. She says 3 of the human border pickets are logging as arrived already docked. No transit signature, no approach vector. They register as if they had simply always been in position. "A sensor fault," Drethkal said. "She logged it 3 separate times, sir." He considered this for exactly as long as it took to decide it changed nothing. Faulty instruments were not new information. A war marshal who let old instruments rewrite a winning arithmetic had never won a campaign in the first place. Note it. Proceed. Behind him, unseen, Elder Venora sat alone at her station with the 3 logs open side by side, elongated fingers still over the display. She had learned long ago not to raise an alarm the chancel would only vote down. She simply watched and waited and did what her long institutional memory had trained her to do better than anyone else on the council. She paid attention when nobody else would. At Thesson Hold, Ayer's tactical display filled row by row with red. "I have all 86, he said, and something in his voice had gone very quiet, the way a man's voice goes quiet right before it wants to shake. "Every ship in the Kalvathi formation. Locked. Confirm mount assignment," Kestrel said. 94 mounts, 86 targets. "We have redundant fire on every hull class above cruiser." He looked up from the display for the first time since the countdown had started. "Admiral, they don't know. Their sensors aren't even reading us as hostile contacts." She thought of the 6 hours ticking down on the far display. Less than half of it left now. And of the 19 years that had gone into making this exact silence possible. The budget lines nobody outside 3 departments could trace. "We're not on their board at all." "Good," Kestrel said. "Keep it that way." She did not raise her voice, because raising her voice had never once made an order more true. The tests nobody outside the program had ever seen run, all of it built toward a single moment where the other side would look at her and see nothing at all. Osoro's voice came in low from the far console. "Vantage team staged. Vossler's squad is ready in Bay 4. Standing by on your mark." "Not yet," Kestrel said. "Let them cross first. Let them commit." In Bay 4, Vossler stood with 10 soldiers around him. Nobody speaking. Everyone's eyes on nothing in particular. The floor, a bulkhead seam, the middle distance. It was the kind of quiet that settled over a room before something that could not be taken back. He rubbed his thumb across the disc one more time out of habit and let it go. Somewhere past the door, the hum from the array kept climbing toward whatever pitch meant ready. The Kalvathi fleet crossed the Halvor boundary at the appointed hour, in perfect formation, exactly as Drethkal had planned it. Nothing greeted them. No warning shot, no hail, no border picket scrambling to raise an alarm that would arrive too late to matter. The silence itself should have told him something. A war marshal with 12 campaigns behind him should have recognized a trap built entirely out of the absence of a fight. But silence, to Drethkal, had only ever meant one thing. It meant the other side had already lost and simply hadn't been told yet. Position confirmed inside the boundary, said his second. No resistance, as expected, Drethkal said. He allowed himself for the first time since the vote something close to satisfaction. 5 worlds annexed before this one. A 6th would make a fine round number for the histories, though he did not think in those terms, not really. He thought in campaigns, in scars, in the plain arithmetic of strength meeting weakness and strength winning, the way it always had, the way it always would. Behind him, unnoticed, Venora's console logged a 4th anomaly. She did not report it this time. She had learned what the Chancel did with reports. At Thessenhold, the deadline reached 0, and Kestrel did not send a reply. She let it sit there, unanswered, for 1 full minute, long enough that on the Calvithi bridge someone would have to notice the silence and wonder what it meant, long enough for doubt to start doing work that words never could. Then she looked at Ire and at the red field of 86 locked ships filling his display, and she said the only thing there was left to say before the numbers stopped being a plan and became an event. Fire when ready. Vossler, go. The hum in Bay 4 broke, all at once, into something that was not sound anymore. It was absence, the particular quiet of a room a squad had just left without using a door. Drethkal's secondary eyelids clicked, twice, fast, the way they always did when the arithmetic in front of him refused to resolve. He was looking at his own tactical display, at readings that made no sense, when the first shield alert lit across 19 hulls at once, with no warning shot logged, no launch signature recorded, nothing at all in the sensor history except a result with no visible cause. Report, he said, and for the first time in a very long career, his voice did rise, just slightly, just enough that his second noticed it. Nobody had an answer yet. That was the last clean half-second of a war. His side had already been certain. It had won. 19 ships lost their shields in the same half-second, and none of them had fired a shot yet. Drethkal's second was already shouting orders that made no sense against contacts that weren't there. On the main display, the human border sector remained empty. No fleet, no formation, no launch signature anywhere in 600,000 kilometers of open space. Just his own ships going dark, one after another, as if some hand had simply reached in and turned them off. Find the source, Drethkal said. His voice had steadied again, but his secondary eyelids were clicking now at a rate he had never heard them reach before, fast and uneven, the sound of a mind trying to close a gap that would not close. Then the door to his own bridge corridor opened, and a human soldier was already standing on the other side of it. Vossler didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. He had crossed no visible distance to get there. No shuttle, no boarding tube, no breach alarm in the seconds before his boots hit the deck plating. He simply was there. Rifle low, 3 more soldiers spreading out behind him into a corridor that had been sealed and guarded 90 seconds earlier. Drethkal's eyelids clicked twice before he understood the boarding party wasn't a malfunction. Command deck, Vossler said to the man behind him, and nothing else. It didn't need to be more than that. Every word in this room was already doing at least 2 things at once, announcing a fact, and ending an argument that had lasted 11,000 years. 4 decks away, on a separate Calvithi command ship, the same thing was happening at the same time, in the same 11-minute window Kestrel had built her whole silence around. Phone's second volley crossed the same 600,000 kilometers of empty space it shouldn't have been able to reach, and took the shields off 11 more holes before their gunnery crews had finished registering the first alert. 94 mounts. 86 targets, Ire said back at Thessenhold, reading off the numbers as they updated. She did not send a warning, he said it flat. The way you'd read a weather report, because that was the only way to say it and keep working. Kestrel didn't answer. She was watching a different number climb, the count of disabled hulls, ticking upward the way a clock ticks, inevitable and unhurried. Elder Venora sat alone at her station on a ship 2 decks below Drethkal's, watching her own sensors record the things she had reported 3 times and been ignored 3 times. She had not raised the alarm a 4th time. She had known by then exactly what the Chancel would say to a 4th warning, which was nothing, because the Chancel only heard numbers it already believed. So instead, when the boarding alert finally sounded on her own deck, She did the one thing 11,000 years of institutional silence had never trained her to do. She opened a live channel, not to the chancel, but directly to Drethkal's flagship, and she spoke. "I logged it 3 times," she said. "Ships arriving with no transit signature. You told me it was a sensor fault." Her voice did not rise either. In the end, she had learned that from watching him, without meaning to. It was not a sensor fault, War Marshal. It was a different relationship with distance. You're standing inside the proof of it right now. On the other channel, nobody answered her. There was too much else happening for anyone to answer her. The mundane detail nobody would remember until much later. In the middle of all of it, Vossler's free hand found the disc under his collar and rested there. Not out of nerves, just habit. The same motion he had made in the ready bay before any of this began. Then Drethkal turned to face him, and the moment stopped being routine. "You are a soldier of a species with no standing in this chamber," Drethkal said. It came out steadier than it should have given the numbers dying around him on every display. "Explain how you are here." "We built it to go live once," Vossler said. It wasn't an answer meant to satisfy him. It was the only true thing there was to say, and it was enough. Vossler didn't lower the rifle, and he didn't fire it either. Kestrel's people had never needed to threaten the point twice. By the time the boarding teams had secured 4 command decks without a single shot exchanged in any of them, 61 of 86 ships across the Calvithi formation were reading disabled on every friendly display back at Thessenhold. The math Drethkal had built his entire career on, that distance meant safety, that range was something you could calculate and trust, had simply stopped applying, all at once, everywhere, without asking his permission first. His flagship was not spared, it had been selected. Eyer's voice, back at Thessenhold, had lost the flat calm it started with. "Admiral, it's done. He stopped, because there wasn't a word yet for what it was. 11 minutes. That was all it had taken, start to end, and even Ayer, who had watched the plan built line by line for 19 years, hadn't quite believed it would move that fast until it did. Kestrel picked up the same channel she'd used to send her 3-word reply to the ultimatum. Hours ago now, though it felt like a different lifetime already. "Hold position," she told her own ships. No pursuit, no further fire unless fired upon. It wasn't mercy. On Drethkal's bridge, with Vossler's people holding the room and his own crew standing very still with their hands visible, the war marshal looked at his tactical display one more time. Or it wasn't only mercy, it was the same economy that governed everything she did. A war finish didn't need decoration. At the wreck of a formation that had never lost a single engagement in 3 centuries of doctrine, and he did the thing his mind had been doing since the first shield alert. He tried to run the numbers again. Range, transit time, detection windows, all of it, the whole arithmetic that had made him certain, and none of it closed. There was a gap in the equation, shaped exactly like everything he had just watched happen, and no number he owned could fill it. 2 decks below, Venora closed the channel she had opened, the first one she had ever opened without chancel authorization in a very long life of never doing so, and sat with her hands folded in her lap the way she always did. "How?" he said to no one in particular. To Vossler, to the room, to the 11,000 years of certainty standing behind him like a debt come due. How is this possible at this range? Vossler didn't answer that one either. Some answers weren't his to give. Watching the numbers on her own screen stop climbing, she did not feel triumphant. She felt, mostly, like someone who had said a true thing far too late for it to have changed anything, and now had to live in the room the truth had made. The pre-climax quiet came first, the way it always did before the last thing landed. Vossler crouched by the disc for a moment longer than the moment required, thumb resting against its warped edge, while the rest of his squad secured the last corridor. It was a small, ordinary thing to do in the middle of a war finishing itself around him. Nobody watching would have called it important. Then the door at the far end of the bridge opened, and Kestrel's voice came through on the same open channel Drethkal's own crew was still monitoring, patched now from Thessenhold directly into the room where he stood. "War Marshal," she said, "you're not fighting anymore. You're recalculating. I can hear it." Drethkal did not answer at first. His secondary eyelids clicked, slower now, the frantic rhythm of the last few minutes settling into something worse, a steady, methodical failure to close over and over, the same equation refusing the same inputs no matter how many times he ran it. "There's no configuration," he said finally, "that resolves this range. There isn't one in your doctrine," Kestrel said. "There's one in ours. No triumph in it. No cruelty either. Just the plain fact, delivered the way she delivered everything once and without revision. Behind her, back at Thessenhold, Eyre read the final tally off a display that had gone quiet in a way none of them had heard it go before. Most of the fleet that had crossed the boundary that morning was no longer capable of crossing anything. The rest sat dead in space, waiting on orders nobody was left to give them with any confidence. She did not send a warning. That part had been true from the very first shot, and it stayed true now, at the end. But she also did not send a killing stroke, where a captured one would do. 12 campaign scars ringed Drethkal's forearm, and none of them had prepared him for a fight where the other side simply declined to need the last kind of victory. No warning, Vossler's voice, over the same open channel. No mercy claimed, no further shots fired. It wasn't planned, the shape of it. It came out of him because it was true in that order, plain words, one after another, and it was the kind of thing a soldier says once and means completely. Elder Fenora heard it too, 2 decks down, still sitting with her hands folded the way she always sat, watching a channel she had opened without permission and had not yet closed a second time. "You will be asked," she said quietly, to no one who could hear her yet, "why you spoke instead of staying silent." She did not answer herself. There would be time for that later, in a chancel that would either finally listen or prove, one more time, that it never had. On the bridge above her, Drethkal turned to face the human soldier still holding the room, and for the first time in a long career built on certainty, he asked a question with no arithmetic behind it at all. "What do you call this?" he said. "This range you've built." Vossler didn't answer that one either. It wasn't his question to answer. Kestrel's voice came back over the channel instead, unhurried. The same 3 words that had opened all of this, now closing it from the other direction. "You called it range," she said. "We called it an invitation." Nobody spoke for a while after that. On the certainty's weight, 86 ships had gone into a fight certain of a war they understood, and come out of it having learned in 11 minutes that the war they understood had never existed. Drethkal did not surrender his post, because there was nothing left standing to surrender. He simply stopped calculating out loud, and let his crew be led, unarmed, to the decks Vossler's people had already secured. Kestrel closed the channel from Thessenhold and set the receiver down flat on the console, the way she set everything down. She did not order a pursuit. She did not order a celebration either. Eyre looked at her, waiting for something, a word, an order, anything to mark what had just happened, and she gave him only the smallest nod, the kind that meant stand down, nothing more. 2 decks below the Calvithi bridge, Venora reviewed the logs alone, the way she had reviewed every dismissed report of her long life, except this time no committee would vote the record away from her. Arrival with no transit signature, range with no spool-up. A relationship with distance that had never once, in 11,000 years of measured strength, occurred to anyone in her chamber as something a smaller species might simply have built. She did not feel like a woman who had been proven right. She felt like a woman who had watched a truth wait 9 years too long to be believed. In Bay 4, back at Thessenhold, Vossler sat on the edge of a crate with his squad settling in around him. Nobody talking much, the adrenaline draining out slow the way it always did after. He reached under his collar and closed his hand around the disc. It didn't have edges anymore. It hadn't had edges in years. But turning it over now, thumb tracing the warped metal where 2 separate tags had melted into one shape, he could feel for the first time since the day it happened, where the 2 things had once been 2 things, not because it had changed, because he finally had a reason to look for the seam instead of just the weight. Somewhere above him, the countdown clock that had governed the last several hours of his life had already reset itself to 0 and gone dark, the way clocks do once the thing they were counting has already happened. Kestrel walked the length of the empty command deck, once alone, the way she always closed out a long shift, and stopped at the viewport. Outside, the wreck of a formation drifted in the dark, disabled not destroyed, waiting on terms nobody had negotiated yet. She did not say anything to the empty room. There was nothing left that needed saying out loud. She turned the display off, the last light in the room narrowing to a single point before it went dark entirely, and the disc, still warm from Vossler's hand 2 decks away, sat where it always sat, a shape with a seam only one man could find, closed now and carried forward.